Hello and welcome to the We Don't Have Time Davos Hub, coming to you live from the 2025 World Economic Forum from beautiful Davos, Switzerland. And we can see just how beautiful it is. We're actually overlooking this lovely town from our base camp, the Arctic Basecamp, in fact, in front of Hotel Schatzalp. And it is such a pleasure to be here. This is our first day of broadcasting. We couldn't be more thrilled to share with all of you an incredible lineup of interview discussions over the coming days. And you will hear, as you always do when you tune in to broadcast, from scientific experts, from high-level executives, political change makers, and inspiractivists. We will cover the whole spectrum of perspective here from Davos. And we have one goal in mind, as we always do, to bring this message of climate action to this gathering of the world's most prominent leaders. I'm really happy to be here in Davos, pretty much anywhere but Washington, D.C. today. And it's also the first time that the founder and co-CEO of We Don't Have Time, Ingmar Rentzhog, and I are here in Davos together. So Ingmar, welcome.
Thank you.
And, we've never done this together, but this year, in particular, not just because of what's going on across the Atlantic in Washington, D.C., which is the whole reason you started We Don't Have Time in the first place, was when it was first elected, but this is a uniquely important Davos, and it's why we both showed up. So tell our audience a little bit why you thought it was so important for us to be here, for We Don't Have Time to be in Davos this week.
Many of the international meetings we are active on, our main mission is often to push for the climate agenda and influence the meeting to do more on climate. For this particular international meeting, it starts the same day Donald entered the White House. I think the most important mission we have is to actually broadcast how is the world reacting on this. And how can we keep pushing the climate agenda forward together? So that's what we're going to focus on. There's a lot of things going on in the world. And I think what we really need to do is stay on track and don't get distracted. Because we can't ignore climate, even if we have politicians trying to do that. It ends up in big fires, in economic losses. It will probably become very soon a financial crisis. These are things we need to take care of, and we don't have time for craziness or distractions. That's what we're here to do. We're here to push.
There's a lot of pushback on Davos, though, right? We can't ignore that. There's a lot of protest. In fact, yesterday there were protests here in Davos that made it difficult for many to get access in their badges. Why is it still so important to show up despite much of the resistance against this gathering?
I would say We Don't Have Time, our mission is to show up where the leaders are, and the leaders are here. We don't need to agree with everything said here to do the impact. So that's our mission. But I can also say that it's not World Economic Forum, they have no power.
You heard it here.
So we shouldn't, of course we can protest against a meeting to make better. That probably makes a lot of sense in many ways, but the power is not here. But the people that have the power is here. So the meeting is not the power, but the people here power, and those are the minds we need to change.
Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing that. We never shy away from having hard conversations, and we promise to continue to be provocative through these coming days in our broadcast. Thank you, Ingmar. I'll check in with you a little later.
Thank you.
Okay, so now let's talk about where we actually are. This coat should be a little bit of an indication. We are definitely outside. We're feeling the fresh air, and we're in front of a polar expedition tent in front of Hotel Schatzalp. And that's because We Don't Have Time is finally, long overdue, partnering with the brilliant organization Arctic Basecamp. And they are here in Davos for exactly the same reason. It's why our ethos are so aligned. It's to fight for climate action. So I have with me Arctic Base founder, Gail Whiteman. Gail, welcome to our We Don't Have Time Davos broadcast.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. And please share with us and our audience, first and foremost, what is your background? What inspired you to create this whole experience, and particularly here in Davos?
Well, thank you. Great question. It's the 9th year that Arctic Basecamp is in at Davos, and our mission is to speak science to power. Now, I'm a social scientist in the business school. I'm the Hoffman professor at the University of Exeter, and my specialty is to actually take the natural science data and get it into the boardroom. So what I try to do is translate the shifts that we're seeing in major ecosystems, particularly in the polar regions, and to bring that into discussions on global risk. There's no better place to talk about global risk than there is actually at the World Economic Forum at Davos this week. So that's what we try to do, and that's how we do it. And we set up indeed a real weather haven tent and a very large group of people, of experts and youth, actually up here all week at Davos.
I remember my first time experiencing the Arctic Base Camp, and I couldn't believe that you really, it's incredible. You practice what you preach. You were camping out here with your team and really bringing conversations, critical conversations, to the forefront of what's going on in Davos. So what are these conversations? What is it talking about here?
Well, I think the forum in the annual is one part of what the forum actually does, but it is a certain important gathering of the world's elite. No question that big businesses, big government is here, as well as hopefully, let's say, progressive voices from civil society. But on top of that, the forum also releases a global risk report a year, and we can take a look at how climate change, weather, biodiversity loss, and beyond actually continue to stay top 10. And we really see that because, what happens in nature and what happens in the polar region drives global risk everywhere. And that is what we try to do. When we came 9 years ago, what we really saw was that there was stuff that was happening in climate, but it's really at its infancy. And in about, that period of time, nearly a decade now, the number of events inside the forum, inside the main cons on nature and climate has blocked. And certainly on the outside, the side events, we also see that. But this year is different. We see a lot less. What we really see is not climate when we go down the mountain. We see is AI, tech, business, money, and the back global economy. So the landscape has shifted quite a lot this year.
So what is it about climate that is so critical to not just the global risk report, because it was number 2, natural disasters around the world, impact stability of just society and progress and next generation's futures. And the World Economic Forum put that out. But what is it that we want to set up this broadcast with in terms of facts and science? What is happening to the planet? What is happening to the climate that needs to be at the forefront of everyone who's here's minds?
Yeah, so I think that most of the world economy and most of our society was built on the idea that the natural environment was pretty stable. We were in the Holocene period. It was the sweet spot, the Goldilocks spot, where it looked really easy and we could build major agricultural, major civilization, major culture, major economies. And what we've seen, certainly the last 100 years, but ramping up in the last 40, is that it has moved out of that safe space. This last year, 2024, was almost on record. We've crossed the plus 1.5 Celsius. Hopefully next year we'll bounce down a little bit. We're looking at a decade average. We don't want to stay at the plus 1.5 C warmer world, but we are moving into out of the safe space and into a variable zone, which will affect everything. It will affect not just extreme weather, which it does, but it's food, water security, supply chain disruption. We see it on everything that we do. So it's really about all the global risks, health risks. They're really related to what's going to happen and is happening in the climate right now.
So despite that reality, this lived reality of impacts of the planet warming, and despite natural disasters being number 2 on the global risk report that the World Economic Forum has put out, we're still seeing less climate conversations, as you described.
Absolutely.
Less from previous. So it sounds like it's more critical than ever for Arctic Basecamp to be here, to have this content, to be live streaming it, to share it with audiences all around the world, to keep that pressure on, to keep that momentum going. What is it that you're hoping to achieve by doing all of this?
Well, this is still in. It doesn't matter what any administration around the world says about science. Science is still in. You know, the facts are on our side. The physics is on our side. And we will keep going up at the World Economic Forum, not just as Arctic Basecamp, but all of our community of scientists to really convey the message that what is happening, it's dangerous, it can only get worse unless we actually have urgent action now. So we're up the mountain and we're watching and we are not going anywhere.
And what are you hoping that the leaders are going to take away from this? So what have you seen, right? It's been 9 years. I'm really excited. Next year is your 10th year anniversary. Yeah. We're gonna go even bigger than this year. And so holding ourselves accountable by putting that on camera. Yeah. And we're going to see, hopefully next year, what we say today has gone into effect. But before you say what you want to see in the coming year, what have you seen over these years in terms of political will and change leadership?
Well, you know, when we first started to come to Davos and we talked about Arctic Basecamp, really the conversation about the Arctic was of who owns the oil and gas, who owns the minerals. That conversation is coming back up, but quite frankly, what we have accomplished over that 9-year period is to actually show that what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay there. It affects global risks everywhere. We only have to look at what's happened in LA with the fires. That's the Arctic in the background, right? That is how it's ramping up extreme weather. And I think we really shifted the narrative. Accenture Forum launched a report in December, really looking at 5 key industry sectors and the economic, the material, financial risks coming from polar change into those sectors, and it is significant. Whether that's the Arctic driving supply chain disruption or food and water insecurity, or frankly, heat stress. So not even just extreme weather, that heat stress, it really hits at productivity. All of those things are coming from change, amplifying those threats.
So do we think this economic argument, this lost productivity argument might sway, let's say, the new administration that's coming in to the United States, or money, 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 right? So what do we think with Donald Trump now taking office? What's that going to do for climate?
Well, I think if we can't what he's going to do from day onward, but what we can see is what happened in the past, and clearly the pushback and the clampdown, the legitimacy of science and of climate science, and taking out the words climate science, trying to change or move public access to data. I anticipate that will continue, but frankly, the scientific community has anticipated that, and it's still strong. We know what's going on. The natural scientists that I work with, they've got everything together, and what we do know is that it's expensive. Climate change is not cheap. It's not about a moral argument alone, although it is. It's not just about a humanitarian argument, although it is. It is obviously about also an economic argument. Sure. It's easier to fix it than to let it get worse.
Right. Putting money into proactively preparing, building that adaptation, building that resilience is so much cheaper ultimately than the relief and recovery efforts. And the federal government is swiftly running out of cash. And if these impacts happen in the United States simultaneously, then it really is just less relief dollars for those impacted communities. So maybe that'll take us somewhere.
100%. And then, we can also see with the Trump administration coming in, talking about who owns Greenland, and wouldn't it be great if the U.S., Greenland, and also my home country, Canada, made it into an additional state. I mean, that's kind of that sort of bluster, gets everybody shaky and everybody talking about it. But quite frankly, I mean, what we can see is that Arctic countries know that the polar regions are in trouble, and they're going to work hard to fix them. And if they don't, the rest of us will pay the price.
So let's talk about Greenland, right? So what are your thoughts there? What intention of Trump's son showing up to Greenland? Was it just one of those, here while other to just distract the world, or is there some actual nefarious intent behind that trip?
Well, I can never speak to anybody's intentions and have the answer to that. Certainly, it's a great discussion. It was a great soundbite, but let's be honest, throughout the Arctic region, including Greenland, it's access to critical minerals, right? That's what it is about, as well as, geopolitical tensions in the Arctic, which we've seen, of course, ramp up with Russia over the past few years.
Sure. And, we had a chance to chat a little bit before we got on camera, and we were talking how it is a national security issue now. And so the U.S. is, especially with the Trump administration, it's about the money, it's about the national security. And so there's an opportunity to really create an alliance globally. And that's the benefit of being at a multilateral event like this that the World Economic Forum is hosting, to build those relationships up. So what could the US and Canada and various allies do to really put the Arctic potentially against the geopolitical interests of China or Russia?
Yeah, well, actually, I think perhaps counterintuitively to that question, I actually think we need to get the rest of the world to understand that the Arctic is, in a sense, a global insurance policy against disaster. So it shouldn't be those Arctic countries that actually look after the future fate of the Arctic. It should actually be about all the countries that are going to suffer if the Arctic changes dramatically. So that is China, that is India, that is Brazil, that is multiple countries within the African continent. So actually, they should have a voice on how we protect the Arctic, because they will pay the price on the front lines of change if we lose Arctic sea ice and if the permafrost thaws and methane is released in a significant way. Greenland actually gets uncontrolled melt, and that kicks off also West Antarctic ice sheet. So it's the rest of the world. The Amazon are the lungs of the planet, but the Arctic is the circulation system, and we have to protect that as a global community, and that's why Davos is important. It's not just a polar region, polar country ownership question.
Sure. You are such an advocate for the Arctic. I think of you as the spokesperson for the Arctic, right? And really the spokesperson for the ice and protecting the ice and preserving the ice. And you've recognized that there needs to be additional trusted spokespeople to reach audiences over the world. You've done this in collaboration with influencers, with celebrities. We had the pleasure of having you on our broadcast previously with your friend and supporter, Rainn Wilson, for those tuning in. If you're a moderation, you'll know exactly who he is for sure. The show The Office. If you're a younger generation, please watch it. It's excellent. But Rainn is, he's a comedian, and it's not naturally something you would affiliate with him, but he's a big advocate, thanks to you, convincing him that this is something he could be really, really support and make impact in by lending his voice and his platform. Talk to us about why that's important to really create those partnerships and collaborations.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing I want to say is actually my natural science colleagues that are experts on the sea ice. I mean, they're the spokespeople. I just simply take their messaging, their data, and I try to make it understandable to the business audience and actually consumers and citizens around the world. So that's sort of my sweet spot. Also, the indigenous people that live in the Arctic, real, I think, spokespeople of that eco-region. It is important, though, if we're going to try and communicate why the Arctic matters to the rest of the world, that we use various different spokespeople that can reach into the hearts and minds of other people. When we take a look at comedians and we take a look at celebrities, we've had Ellie Goulding here. We've had Billie Eilish do videos for us. We've had a real range of folks. And Rainn, of course, is on our advisory board. And together, he and I and a U.S. comedian, Chuck Tate, set up Climate Basecamp, which is a sister initiative. So Arctic Basecamp speaks science to power. That's why it's Davos. Climate Basecamp speaks to culture. And who better is actually to use people that know how to speak to culture?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, you're a true translator of the science. Yeah. You have given platforms to spokespeople that really, those that represent what is, most important to them and their cultures, right? Their very livelihoods. And then identifying the right audiences for them to speak to as well. So a Rainn or somebody indigenous from Greenland really speak from the heart about what they're seeing happen to their ancestral homelands. And that's critical. That's entrenched in science, identifying trusted spokespeople. And you've really done that successfully. And yet that is still seems to be something that climate communities generally are struggling with doing, is translating the science in a way that resonates. We still have climate denial. Which is like in the current state of the world, is shocking that anybody would say, what do you mean? Climate change isn't happening, right? So that's one challenge I see as a climate communicator. But I'd love to hear from your perspective. Is that a challenge you see as well? What other challenges are we still facing to solve this?
Yeah, I mean, there's no question the communication landscape has got a huge opportunity that we could actually move forward faster in more innovative ways. The key thing is to figure out what is the target audience that we need to involve in debate that are not involved. Quite frankly, it's the movable middle. Most people out there are not deniers or advocates. They're just living their life. So we have to reach them in the suite of what they're paying attention to and they're paying attention to doom and gloom. Why would you? You're paying attention to, how do you pick your kids up from soccer? How's your job going? Are you going to the gym? They're talking about their vacation. So let's talk about the things that matter to them: food, fashion, sports, entertainment, and music. And then try to use the knowledge we have to show all of the things are at risk. And indeed, we have to save the things we love. And that's why things like the polar regions are important, because they drive risk everywhere. So I think the real issue here is about how do we translate the message, and not from what we say as scientists or as campaigners, which we obviously see a lot here in Davos as well. It's actually starting with what resonates to people and working our way back. On the communication landscape, the other, I think, absolute wildcard here is misinformation and the whole AI turbocharge coming in with that. And that's a real concern. We can simply not catch it fast enough right now. I mean, traditionally, even a few years ago, what happened was natural scientists tried to respond to articles that went out in the press. But by the time they responded, they'd been posted so vast,
Right.
on media that story is still out there, and the science couldn't simply track it. So I think we really have to get much more serious about how do we use technology and how do we counter that misinformation and AI turbocharged messages that are out there.
I think you just posed some serious challenges that we're going to be coming back to over and over again over the next few days in this broadcast. So the themes of technology, the role of AI, communication, just being supercharged by technology, lack of oversight now, deregulation of the tech sector, and when it comes to this, of regulation, and that's really it's new. This is something we're going to keep a close eye on. But despite all of the challenges we just outlined, are you still hopeful? Can we overcome this?
Yeah, I am. And I have had a few moments last year and a half where I felt I was losing hope, that I thought we weren't going to make it. I do think we have to focus on adaptation and adaptive capacity. What's locked into the climate system right now, particularly with things on Greenland melt, we're just going to build adaptation. That being said, I think that humanity can rise to the challenge, but we have to be honest with ourselves, and we actually, really make the impossible possible.
So where audiences that might be learning about you for the first time go learn more about the Arctic Basecamp, and how can they get engaged and involved?
Oh gosh, we need so much help, and certainly we need help from resources. We also need help from communication. We need help from networks. Best thing is to arcticbasecamp.org, or follow us on Instagram or any of the other social media channels. Reach out. We could definitely use that.
And is there anything exciting to share with our audiences about what's to come for Arctic Basecamp, especially as we go into the 10th year anniversary?
Well, the 10-year anniversary for us is really important because 10 decade of science, we also see how that has changed positively and negatively. But I think what we're going to do on our 10-year anniversary here is going to blow the socks off Davos. So I can't give away too many of the details right now, but stay tuned.
Okay, awesome. Well, with that, we will close the session. Thank you so much, Gail Whiteman, founder of Arctic Basecamp, for kicking off this collaborative broadcast at the 2025 World Economic Forum. Appreciate your insights.
We're just so delighted to have you here.
That was a fast conversation with Gail, who always has so many insights and really is able to tie the Arctic to our everyday lives. What happens in the Arctic absolutely does not stay in the Arctic. So for viewers who have been enjoying this broadcast, you are now, stay tuned, because this is a panel that we are super excited about to have early on in the day. We know that the world has already begun to feel the terrible effects of a warming planet. and rising seas, devastating storms, vanishing biodiversity. This is just a preview of even worse impacts to come. And that sounds like something that could really encourage all of us to just become disassociated, to think that we can't do anything. But the reality is that the world is going to survive and humans will be on this planet. We just need to reduce the amount of suffering and create a future that is thriving and get ahead of it today. And so the fight for the climate, as we know, really is the fight for the next generation. And it's deeply important to young people, and they will inherit the consequences of the choices that we make. So this story isn't just about the doom and gloom. It's not just about the challenges. Around the world, we're seeing solutions. We're seeing collaboration. We're seeing young people getting excited, bringing to the forefront ideas and innovative solutions, and really an unrelenting drive, a refusal to disassociate, a refusal to just kind of give up and give in. We believe here at We Don't Have Time that it's crucial to listen and amplify youth voices. That's why I'm so excited about this panel that we're doing early in the broadcast. It's important to get this optimism and get you all excited. You don't have to be here. It's hard to be in Davos. It's expensive to be in Davos. We're going to get into all of that. But you are engaged where you are, and we will do examples and opportunities to tune in and work with us and to carry a message to real action. So I'm thrilled now to joining me on stage the Arctic Basecamp ambassadors. It's an inspiring group of young change makers from around the world who are leading the way for the climate fight for their generation and generations to come. And these youth ambassadors are part of the Arctic Basecamp, this youth ambassador program. And on stage with me, please join me in welcoming 4 representatives. Camilo. She is the executive director of Oya Institute. Welcome, Camila. We have Sofia Karadi, a PhD researcher from the Federal University Minas Gerais. Please correct the pronunciation. Gerais. We have Sam Lewis, the youth ambassador from Arctic Basecamp, and Mayumi Soto, PhD student at the University of Cambridge. So, ladies, really appreciate you all being here. Sophia, we're going to start with you. We've called this session Youth Voices for the Planet. So, what does it mean to be a voice for the planet?
Yeah, I think that resonates differently for each of us, but reflecting on that, I think that as youth, we boldly stand for the planet and speak out about the emergency we live in, especially in Davos, when we face systemic challenges represented by the world leaders here. So when we say that we can be voices of the planet, I think we break this colonial narrative that this is the current systems that fail to justify our society control over nature. So from one side, we have that humans exist apart from nature, but we remember that we are a part of nature, so that we are rescuing that traditional narratives. And I would just like to add a brief comment from an indigenous leader from Brazil, Ailton Krenak, which says that the rivers, those beings that always habitat the world in different shapes, those are the ones who stress me that if there is a future, this future is ancestral because it was already. So when we regain kind of narratives, and I think that youth does that boldly, I think we say that we are voice of the planet because we are part of it.
I love that. Thank you. This is what we need here in Davos. We really need intergenerational conversations, and unfortunately, there hasn't been enough of that. But thanks to Arctic Basecamp and this program, it's an opportunity to bring the youth voice to these high-level conversations and remind everyone what's really at stake. Your futures, right? Ultimately. So, Camilla, I'm going to come to you. You working with, and also the youth is what brings social media, because I see everybody walking around confused about what to do. We need your voices to help explain. I'm not that much older, but in geriatric millennials, because you could use your expertise here. Now, as a social media creator, how do you use that technology to really communicate about the climate? Tell our audience about your project.
Awesome. So first of all, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity of being here. The Arctic Basecamp and WWF team has made possible for us, and working with content creators to I was thinking about doing content creation, to be honest, a few years ago, but I went to my first COP, and it was like COP26, right in the middle of the pandemic, and see a rooms full of like power, and those people talking about visions that affect my life and me without us in the room.
Right.
That makes me really mad. And then when I come back to Brazil, I just realized that regular people don't follow those discussions. It's boring, it's difficult, it's technical. It's not that they are not able to do it, but media has sold to them other things to consume. And who is the better people to say them other those selling their lifestyles? So when I started to the Creators Account program, so we decide to go like all the billion biomes are at risk now. I've been here to being a bridge of the interconnectedness of the Arctic and tropical forests, for example. And I invite them to the journey. As we are in this magic mountain, I invite the creator to see firsthand what is at stake if they don't act, if they don't say truth, if they are not committed to real information, if they are just fighting for one more like, one more view, disregarding that the seriousness of this conversation, they have power. Like I was just showing them, when you have 3,000 likes, it's not like it's 3,000 people.
Right.
We don't make sense of like which room, and then some of the millions of views and likes and for like shares, So content creation is a tool to educate people and get them engaged. Most than that, is a tool to make them get out of the fear state. We've been working on like literally psychological approaches to change fear to love. If we don't have an emotional connection with our land, we won't be able to fight for it.
Basically, this idea of not feeling hopeless, right? Because it is, and I felt bad setting this segment up with the negatives, but the reality is that it's scary. So,
To be honest, like hopelessness is a fair emotion, and we need to acknowledge. What we cannot do is stay in hopelessness forever. So like if you feel sad, you're gonna, but if you love, like sad because it's like isn't the ending, it's like it's getting worse, as this just seeing everything. But I love this much that I find the energy to rebuild.
Exactly.
Like you in the sadness, you'll find strength to move forward. That's the message.
that's great. You feel hopelessness because you have love ultimately. And
Yes.
so harness that love for action. Okay, amazing. Mayumi, you have a lot of international experience. All of you, you're here. I mean, this is an incredible opportunity to be in a location where so few people get exposure. And you've seen the benefits of this cross-cultural cooperation and just bringing together different people and different cultures. So talk to us a little bit about your views on this one and in the climate space specifically.
Yeah, I think that's one aspect of our generation that radically differs from, at least me being from Japan, where, most people who live in Japan are Japanese, and my generation is quite different from my parents, my grandparents' generation, in that we have so much exposure, not just from traveling, but also social media. Although we talk about misinformation and sort of the perils of what AI and fake news and how it proliferates on the internet, it also allows us to connect to people from disparate geographies. I think one of the things about being in the climate movement has been the ability to connect to people from Brazil and the US, and being able to understand different ways in which the climate crisis affects us at a local level. But then also being able to tie into connecting that many of the perpetrators behind the issues in our community are very much interlinked, and they come very much systemic issues, as you mentioned earlier, colonialism, one of them. And I think that that's been really enlightening for me to have that safe space where we can talk about this. it's not always a normalized discussion where I've lived in the past and even back home. In particular, say that we in Japan struggle a lot with gender equity. That's not really discussion. Being able to travel a lot and have these discussions around what gender equity looks like in climate space has been really liberating for me, because it's not always a space that's welcoming back home. And I would say that it's been very transformative, and I think that's one of the benefits of having these cross-cultural experiences as well.
Amazing. Thank you for being vulnerable and sharing that openly and honestly. That takes courage. We appreciate that a lot. So, Storm, I'm coming to you. You've done research on food sovereignty, and it's all connected, right? The Arctic is warming the planet. It's causing increased climate impacts. We're seeing natural disasters. We're seeing food insecurity. We're seeing water scarcity. So let's go deeper into the food portion of this. Tell us what food, make the connection between food and climate, and tell us a little bit about your research.
Yeah, so for me, has definitely been my entry point into climate action. So growing up, I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and I had a strong affinity for gardening. So I would find my hands in the dirt, the vermiculture in elementary school yard, and that wasn't necessarily the norm. And I made the larger connection to health through my family's history of breast cancer and the role that diet plays in communal health. And so that for me was what drove me to then pursue my studies in food sovereignty and food justice. So going to hear about the connection between the Arctic and food systems. Everybody eats. Everybody has a in accessing culturally appropriate and nutritious foods. And so when you think about warming, it's happening in local levels. So what that's like for me in Brooklyn, New York is the urban heat island effect and the flooding. And so for instance, not many people know about the vast amount of gardens and farm spaces that are present in New York City. So in Brooklyn alone, there's over 100 green thumb gardens. And then there's also 80 different Black-led food outlets that are present feeding people every day. And so then on a day-to-day experience, we feel there may not be the language or rhetoric around climate for everybody, but they feel the impact. So many farmers are experiencing extreme flooding, especially in the city. They're experiencing extreme heat. And I remember for myself volunteering this last season during the farm at the Hattie Carthan Community Garden. There were where I was weeding and I could see just bending down and standing up just from the extreme heat.
Yeah.
And so in that moment, I'm thankful for the scientific language to kind of make that connection. But I think many people are experiencing on a day-to-day these larger climate crisis, larger shifts in their day-to-day experiences. And so food sovereignty in particular, the way I view it is there are the root of food sovereignty is really increasing economic resilience, that individuals are not only just receiving whatever is available at the moment, but they have the autonomy over their entire food supply chain. So thinking about the ownership over the production of food, the distribution of food, and so that's the markets, the transportation systems even. Brooklyn Pack is a great example of a Black food distribution system in New York City. And also the financial institutions, so Black Farmer would be an amazing example as well of ownership over all parts of the supply chain, so that when there is instability, political instability or environmental instability, is a autonomy and community ownership over the systems in place.
Everybody is such an incredible spokesperson for today. It's unbelievable. Each of you are just really owning your space, and it's very impressive to see, and I'm glad Brooklyn has a representative like you. I'm also Bed-Stuy over here, so yes. Have to represent. All right, I'm gonna switch up the order, but it won't seem like it because I'm going back to Sophia, but I am gonna switch up the order, I swear. But it's because I wanna go from food to environment, because this is where you've been doing research. And we're here in Davos. We need to make these connections about how everything is interconnected. We see how the Arctic losing its ice, the planet warming is resulting in food insecurity, everything I was just mentioning. But what is it that you want those that are here and those that are tuning in to take away about the environment, Sophia, based on your research? What do you want them to understand?
Yeah, I think that like this point of interconnectedness, because we cannot talk about food and just limited to that. We cannot address water and just limited to that. We have to understand that our systems are interconnected, especially here we talk about losing permafrost, how that impacts the water circulation and the whole climate systems. So there is a term, the environmental system science, that's called the feedback loop. So some sections, they can amplify kind of feedbacks. Let's say when we have a warmer planet and we use more air conditioning, actually this is emitting more greenhouse gases, and that amplifies global warming. So this is an example of positive and amplifying feedback, but there is also a negative loop. Understanding how these climate systems and cycles function, and that we are at Davos and world global leaders making decisions. That's is not limited to companies, their countries, but discussing as a global society. And I think they putting on the plate the real diplomacy and be really understand these interconnects of us as individuals and as a collective.
Yeah, because what is the business, bottom lines, if there's environment to be operating in, right? It's like missing the plot. Talk about like missing the plot completely. Mayumi, I'm coming back to you. So we've talked about how much you've gained from being able to have exposure and to different cultures. Talk to us about the importance of intergenerational exchanges as well. So, you know, having youth that represents countries around the world, is that hitting 2-1, would you say? We need more of that sort of intergenerational and intercultural exchange.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the main misconceptions that most about young people is that, you know, we might offer youthful energy, but maybe we don't necessarily have experience. But kind of refuting that, we do have experience. A lot of our experience are also lived because we are facing the climate crisis in a way that older generations have not experienced. And so I think that intergenerational collaboration is particularly important because not only have that lived experience, but we have these knowledge systems, and we kind of grew up with a generation that's very interconnected and is exposed to very progressive ideas and values. Not everyone, but at least probably the kind of spaces that we operate in, we hold very progressive values around equity and social justice. And I think that having intergenerational collaboration is really important because we are trying to move the needle towards achieving justice. And yes, it's quite a difficult challenge, and we're currently against a larger, you know, hegemonic power, governments, corporations. But I think even if it's uncomfortable, that collaboration is necessary because we're there to kind of pursue environmental justice change. And I think that it's a two-way learning street. So I think that, you know, the older generation, definitely they can provide great mentorship for us. And I think I've had great mentorship, and I think I'll speak to specific people in our communities who really nurtured us and gave us the confidence to even speak on stages like this. But on the other hand, we can also provide that kind of progressive agenda and to kind of push that needle.
Very well said. Very well said. And it's what Gail was saying in the beginning about how it's important to have different spokespeople and to reach different audiences. You're going to resonate much more with those that look like you. That's really just behavioral science 101. And so the fact that we have different representatives that can reach those audiences that are more comfortable and more familiar with their faces, youth from all over the world, representing communities from all over the world, that goes a long way. And that's something we haven't done enough of. So Camilla, I'm coming back to you because that's the communications challenge, right? We haven't created a global network of communicators to really reach audiences with the information that they need. We're working on it. I think we're getting there, but let's hear your thoughts on that. What are the challenges in communicating still?
I think the big challenge, to be honest, is the platforms. It's not the people. We'll be able to reach the people and talk to their hearts and minds. But when companies have such interests at stake, they will do whatever whenever they can to keep their business going, right? In times of communication, I think two main challenges. One is personal beliefs. You cannot like break a belief that someone has like, holding their entire life. Sometimes it's hard to face these things, and they receiving misinformation every day in their phones. So they are like leading to believe in those lies, right? So this is one thing. The second thing is like sometimes people are afraid to speak of hard topics, especially online, because they are afraid of being canceled, of has their numbers drop, because the algorithms, they are made for us to do like silly stuff that was like selling, right? Like that works. If you do something silly or if you're too polarized, like the platforms, the algorithms, they work for you. Like you need to be full against something or full for something. If you're not in a fighting mode, you're not gonna win the audience attention. So it makes really, really hard talk about topics that needs like more time to produce and more time to make it right. But I believe we have initiatives so amazing like the Arctic Basecamp teaching people to do that, and we are doing partnerships. And I need to say that in Brazil we have over 13 million content creators. It's a lot of people talking with millions and millions of people every day. So if we reach their minds and hearts, I think we believe we can reach others too.
Okay, so we need to create vehicles that actually allow the communications to get out there and to fight the interests that are preventing that from happening ultimately, right?
We need to make the internet free as it was when
Right.
it was invented.
Right. And just create more vehicles of, that's why we're doing what we're doing, quite frankly. This is free. Anyone can tune in. There's no firewall. There's no restrictions. And yeah, absolutely. That will build so much equity in the world. There's just free access
Exactly.
to unfiltered information. Yep. Okay, we hear you. That is a great priority to put forward to those that are talking about exactly this in just, down the mountain and in that congressional center. So we hope you're listening. Okay, Storm, back to you. So is it that surprising then, based on what Camilla said, that people aren't getting the information that is relevant and useful for them, their communities? Talk to us about what communities need to understand, what leaders need to understand about food systems that may not be, so prevalent.
Yeah, let me think. Process.
Well, what leaders need to understand? Let's start with that.
Yeah. So what comes to mind first is a large part of my work in food sovereignty is understanding how capital is moved, like to and from food system. And so some of the work that I've done has been in the philanthropic sector. So organizations like the Arrow Foundation, on the work that they do with Regender Culture and Action has been really informative to understand how decision-making is being made in terms of funding sources for food communities. And so I think one of the disconnects is the kind of making happening in silos. So there aren't as many opportunities to have direct community voices playing a key role in how funds are being allocated. And through my research, I interviewed and spoke with over 50 different Black-led organizations and food businesses operating in Brooklyn, New York, and our change is around the funding piece. I have farmers that I worked with, and they've said, hey, there's, a farm that's operating 2 blocks down, and they just got funding for an irrigation system. Meanwhile, I've been working in this industry for in the food systems for 25 years, doing this work on the ground, on the front line. And I don't understand how that's happening. But the thing is, a lot of farmers, they're not necessarily trained specifically in acquiring funds or trained in grant application processes. Their calling work that they do is cultivating food systems, cultivating community, cultivating abundance in the production of food. And so
And it's not made easy for them at all.
It's
There's
not.
so much
It's-
bureaucracy.
yes,
Something necessary.
Use your
Yes.
microphone, please. Go ahead. Feel free to jump in
I was
because we want to make
like,
this conversation.
capacity building is something that is it's necessary. When we go to spaces like COP, for example, we have a lot of countries blocking agreements because they say, "Oh, capacity building is too expensive. It's not in my mandate." So, like, I think Davos is a place for us to put capacity building as part of the process of each implementation project, because most of the implementation is viewed just like, oh, we do our part. It's go everything on mitigation, and the high tech startups that is starting like trying. I saw slogans they say is like something like nature but better. It's like, there's nothing better than nature. So how can we put investment and actually like train people, making them more autonomous and their own adaptability, right?
yeah, and I'll add on to that too. So one of the strategies that I've seen be implemented in more progressive philanthropic efforts is cluster funding. So what that looks like is invest portfolio that is having a common thread between the work that's done, but specifically fund organizations where there are gaps amongst other organizations at the capacity level. So for instance, what that could look like is funding an organization that has a really strong communication for like Arctic Basecamp or Climate Basecamp, and then also funding an organization that is doing the work on the ground. And then there's opportunities for connect across different grantees so that they can help fill those gaps in capacity. So then there's learning opportunities. Then there are learning opportunities that are that don't necessarily require separate funding, but all the different grantees within that portfolio can then benefit from the knowledge, the shared knowledge within the other grantees, something I've seen be very effective.
Yeah, very cool. Talk to us now about, I'm going to throw this out to the panel, whoever wants to start with it. So who's receiving the funding, right? So your personal organizations, your friends' organizations, just organizations you're affiliated with in some capacity or you're just aware of that you would like to highlight. And what those, this isn't like make a pitch for funding. We have a whole segment on that we're going to definitely, we try to link resources to needs. But what are some initiatives underway that you're excited about? Who wants to start? Go
I
ahead.
can start. So I would say main thing on regarding funds. One, money flows relationship. So it's hard if you don't have the connections to actually has the opportunity to pitch. Most of grants is grants. I'm not complaining about small grants. They have a purpose. Some of the objectives require real money to infrastructure adaptation to actually save people's lives, right? So the thing is grants are nice, but we need real money on those open calls. I think this is the second thing. And the third part for me is when you look at like the hands that are receiving money, most of those hands is to our white, is to our global north, and is to our male. So if we not decentralize the money to women-led projects, to minority groups that are doing the work on the field, will be very hard because we are talking about like it's like they don't have capacity to receive a lot of money, but if they don't receive money, they won't be able to pay for training and become more knowledgeable about stuff. So I think this is more
Sure, it's a vicious cycle, ultimately that we need to get out of.
Exactly.
All right, so let's talk about an initiative. Sophia, let me go to you.
Yeah, coming from as a scientist, coming from academia, I was reflecting on that. How make those financial fluxes access research? Because a lot of real good actions are happening on the ground, but especially talking about reality in Brazil, the research and science is not funded. And really now doing my PhD, I question myself if I want to continue in academia after I finish it, because there are not so good perspectives. And I think we need to fund science.
As somebody who had to make that decision after getting her PhD, and clearly I'm not an active researcher or professor at the moment, there's still a lot of opportunity for your expertise outside of academia. And actually, that's where you might be even best suited to translate some of that academic research. There's very few PhDs that would be in front of a camera in Davos right now. So don't be too deterred by not having a tenure track professorship role as an opportunity. There's many paths to take. Hopefully I'm an example of one. So, okay, Mayumi or Storm.
Yeah, I think, Sophia, I totally resonate with that. Also, I think I'm coming closer to the end of my PhD. I have the same sentiments, so definitely not alone. I would say, going on what Camila said, I do think that a major barrier is also the bureaucratic requirements of having formalized. A lot of the organizing that happens by youth happens informally, and I think that makes it very difficult to tap into funds. But there are organizations, Youth Climate Justice Fund, which is youth-led, and that's come into like full force in recent years because they're addressing the issues that face youth. They know that people don't speak English and they shouldn't have to get funding. They might not have a formal education, which sometimes is a barrier. I don't know, that doesn't necessarily have to be indicative. Well, you can organize for solution, and like what you were saying about all the bureaucracies of paperwork, if you don't know how to do it and you have to learn in space like these or have a good mentor, it's very difficult to tap into that. So organizations like Youth Climate Justice are trying to circumvent some of those challenges and connect to the communities on the ground. I think they accept applications in multiple languages, which is really great. And I just want to say, I want to shout out the Nat Geo Explorer community I'm a part of, as they actually fund research, they fund storytellers, they fund photojournalists across a wide set of sectors and specialities, and they give you the money and the freedom to kind of manipulate how you want to use it. And I think that's very important, is to not have these systems that force you, M&E's systems that are very stringent on how actually, use the funds, because, change is very fluid and you have to kind of create the project as it goes. And I think that's something that's really great about having flexible organizations and grant-making funds.
To follow up with you on that point, how much of the fund should dictate, so should be to the funding that there needs to be some sort of collaboration, communication, action required, right? Should that be dictated by those that are providing the resources, or is more flexibility being built in organization a better thing? Curious your thoughts.
I mean, I know that, like in the Nat Geo case, they really, really stress collaboration, and they even provide grants to incentivize collaboration between schools, and also with the community specifically, because I think with a lot of these grants, it gives kind of the award or grant to a single individual at times, and that kind of advertises that individual. That does is diminishes the hard work that's being done at the grassroots. And I think so that's where the collaboration is very important, is that we're not centering ourselves, is that we're actually saying this is a community-led effort. And, obviously, maybe your encouragement is writing the grant, but it's really a whole group behind me. And I think that's important.
Can I just
Go ahead.
build on that? So the organization, one of the philanthropies that fund my organization, they have 200 grantees. And one, it calls Climate and Society Institute. They are based in Brazil. And the program they are running now, they mix the grantees. So if I have something that requires a solar energy project, they go to the solar energy project to come to
That's
me,
cool.
and we join a proposal, can have more money together, and it's institutional money. So we decide how we can allocate the money, So I think some philanthropy organizations, they are really focus and concern proving to the families, donors, how the media, so they block a little bit green tea's freedom. If they trust, I think this is an exercise of trust that the green teas will do with for the meat on the ground.
And just thinking through, if you don't require those receiving the funding to spend half their time sometimes on just communicating back to the funder what they're doing, it frees up a lot more. I can tell. We've all been there. Have we all been there? Okay. All right. Well, not to wallow in that commiseration for too long, but Storm, talk a little bit about the initiatives that you're excited about, some of the funding sources that you want to highlight. Share with us.
Yeah, definitely. Just also want to be very specific to when it comes to funding that. Specifically, I'll highlight the research report that my advisor from grad school, Dr. Dorcita Taylor, produced about funding in the environmental sector. And so specifically, they interviewed and assessed many different reports. And so the big green organizations individually receive more funding than all of the environmental justice organizations that they assessed within that report. So I would highly recommend looking at that, the Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Sustainability.
Disappointed, but not surprised.
Yeah, their page. So that's something to check out if you want to see a really clear breakdown of how funding is distributed and the disparities in that. And so in terms of exciting projects, I'd really want to highlight, again, like the Black Farmer Fund initiative. So they work specifically in the Northeast region and they support Black farmers, and they offer programming such as patient capital, which is something that Black farmers have often been denied and discriminated against, specifically, especially within the U.S. context of the African American experience and with slavery and everything preceding that. There have been USDA's role, or the United States Department of Agriculture's role in predatory lending and discriminatory practices for Black farmers that have led to major losses is a really challenging issue that still impacts farmers today. And so less than 1% of New York State farmers identify as Black within report about like 2017 and so on. So Black Farmer Fund is playing a really important role in funding these initiatives and funding Black farmers to own their means of production.
And are they identify from the federal government, from the USDA? Is that part of it?
So I have to, they have their own sources of funding, so they provide grants directly to farmers. So that, like, they're filling the role, of the financial institutions. So in a sense, they're bridging that gap between federal funding. And I'm sure that they do provide general guidance for other funds, because it's oftentimes like a supplemental resource, but they are providing the funding directly.
That's interesting. I'm mentioning that because of the history of predatory lending, there's so much distrust from Black farmers in the United States, even when administrations like Obama's administration really made an effort to course correct for that, it wasn't taken advantage of because of that history. And so I think it's really great that there's organizations that are helping to navigate that history, to build that trust, actually allocate the funding that administration, well, forget about this current new administration going, the Biden administration, the Obama administration, their efforts to actually provide real genuine funding for those that have been historically disenfranchised in the United States. So I think, for those interested, please look into that more. That's very fascinating. So let's build on this a little bit. We all represent different countries, different cultures. What are we still struggling with there? There's awfully a lot to overcome to really reach equity. Mayumi, you brought it up immediately when I asked the first question to you, in terms of how the youth has more awareness and acknowledgement of that. So let's get into that more. What is it that you want to express and share with those that are here, those that are here? What would you want them to know and understand about exactly that, how we need to course correct for history?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I would place Japan as one of these countries that have to really internally historical reckoning and look at, we're talking about the impacts of colonization and the impacts of imperialism, even the US century of how, everything that the US does has an impact on every other country. I think these are discussions that we need to have, and especially coming from Japan, where there isn't much of this discussion of our own past, our colonial past, and that really breaks my heart, I think, and it kind of, our discussions around gender are also very much absent. And then when I look at how you might think that that's disconnected from decision making in the climate space, but it actually very much is connected. If you look at who's actually sitting in on the Ministry of Environment, who actually gets to make the decisions around, what goes into Japan's NDC, whose voices are heard, it's very much kind of not really acknowledging the kind of social and gendered consequence of climate change and how we really be put at the forefront of building those solutions. I would just say to the leaders here that while there are more of us that have been very privileged to be in space, there are so many people on the ground that are really doing the work as well. I think the case of Japan, language is a massive barrier. Most Japanese people do not speak English, and I think that's a privilege that I very much have, and I can acknowledge that's why I'm also here. But I really think it's important that we do kind of look beyond kind of information that's being presented in English or what's just happening in the global north. We do look to what's happening on the ground, and I think if you listen to those narratives and their stories, I think we'll be able to have a bit more justice-oriented discussions around climate reparations and stuff.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. I want to ask each of you pretty much the same. Let's go down the line. Do you want to go ahead, Storm?
So could you rephrase the question?
Yeah, the idea is, as youth, you are much more advanced in acknowledging the history that has us to the inequity that we're in currently. There's much more awareness or generation of that, and much more just accepting that there's accountability that's needed rather than brushing under the rug. So from your own personal experience and from the state you find yourself in, what that you want to say about that, and especially to the world leaders, to their ears, about how to make future, because they're deciding on future now, how to make it more fair, how to make it more equitable, how to correct for history, how to ensure that this doesn't repeat itself.
So for me, I think I've often been fortunate to be in spaces with different executive or leaders in this field. And so but that's not enough. I think some of the most effective impact I've had has been in my role serving on boards. And so thinking about how decision-making is being made, and oftentimes youth voices are not represented and reflected on those spaces. So I'll highlight just Green Leadership Trust work, diversifying environmental boards, and also not just about putting your space or putting your name into these different rooms or being present, but also having the support system so that you're not feeling alone, not feeling siloed as a voice or representative, and creating support systems and outside of that. And so Green Leadership Trust does that in their retreats. So they have a community of environmental board members from diverse backgrounds that come together and can share in those experiences and really support one another as we're moving through these choices.
Excellent, thank you. Sophia?
Yeah, what I was reflecting on, I think it's one of the major struggles in climate diplomacy nowadays, considering the common but differentiated responsibilities on greenhouse gases emissions, because mostly of the North is developed, let's say that, due to the historical pollution of their industries, all of that. And now even progressive governments in Global South, they defend that they have the right to pollute, to develop and grow. And I think this is fair, but this is limited thought. And this relates to the systemic thinking we were just touching upon before. And I think, yeah, it's hard to put all the responsibility on the Global South. You have to think differently. You have to develop in a different way. So how all those countries should collaborate, and there's a discussion also touches the financial topic. How can Global North finance Global South under that? And I think that's, yeah, how how historical development touches our current struggles in the climate diplomacy.
That raises the question, what is development, right? This is the right question to make, because what we call development is just a economic system that is broke from the beginning, and no one is raising a flag radical enough to rethink everything. Everyone is talking about of like, let's rebuild from inside. Let's like make incremental changes. We don't need incremental changes anymore. We need radical changes now. And what we call development. I don't know how to explain in English this, because it's a very wise guy who called him Nego Bispo, but he says that we don't need development, we need involvement. And we need people engaged from inside, committed to, like from the guts, they need to be committed. What I feel is that a lot of people look at us as like, you were too naive. I was working with a CEO a few years ago, and he was like, I was your age, I'm thinking the same. And what is happening to you? And then he laughed and say, shareholders. So the thing is, the issue is with others. If they not believe that the money will flow better, if they don't believe that they could do better, that the results is worthy, they won't change where money goes. That's the issue, you know. Like, how many board meetings, like really billionaire board meetings, we had a chance to go. I learned that if you buy some stock, you can actually go to a meeting of shareholders, speak there. So that's my next step, you know, like, because if you have a stock, you can speak. No, like sometimes we need to buy our. It's like this, like, but Davos gives us a perspective that is very different. Gail said to us that like every conversation matters, and this is important. You know, support systems make all the difference. I want to highlight a organization that is U.S.-based organization, but they're awesome. It's called Taproot Earth. They has for years getting together Black folks seeking for liberation and now climate reparations. And we are getting a serious discussion in March around climate reparation back into the church time, because colonization was something that was supplied by the church. You know, when your faith dictates something, it's everything. And unfortunately, our world still works on faith and beliefs, numbers, data, and science, right? So we need to change what people are believing now. And Taproot does that in a very beautiful way. They have been creating this where Black folks can be free, can be happy. And it's really, really hard, because when we are in places like most of the time we are trying to prove ourselves at best, like all the time, to, you know, that I'm worthy to be here. I know I am now, but until I get here, it's hard. And how can I open spaces for more people like me? That I think that's the real compromise, right? Like, we are committed to open doors for more people, but open doors sometimes requires us stay silent when something we want to confront, but it's like, it's not time, maybe it's not the language. So I'm trying to learn how to balance, like.
And any minority representation will feel like women, just broadly, right? Every event I came to, I had the exact same thought until you're 40, and then you just don't care what people think. Or I think for you, it's going to be earlier than that, and I hope it just gets earlier and earlier, because yeah, you start to feel you belong somewhere, and that's powerful. And then it's exponential. And if you can fake that, I highly encourage you to, because it really is the fake it till you make it. And eventually that's who you are. Okay, so have any of you on this panel of what with ExxonMobil and how shares were bought, enough shares were bought of ExxonMobil? This was like 5 years ago, maybe a little bit more now. And they were able to put a activist on the board of directors as an independent director. So that was exactly that plan and logic that went into effect. And there is a independent director who represents environmental interest on the board of ExxonMobil. So there are moves like that. It's expensive, obviously, and it's counterintuitive because you're become a shareholder, and then you want to blow. Technically, you're looking to kind of Trojan horse or even blow up its revenue model. So it takes a lot of power, a lot of courage, a lot of resources to do it, but it is what's needed. And there needs to be a spotlight on the independent directors. Who are those people, right? Because the CEOs have the flag, but the CEOs can be replaced. Why not get the board as well? Because the board represents the shareholders. So as incredibly smart youth leaders, and those that are tuning in, just putting this straight out there. Okay, so we're coming to the close of this session. We want to ask all of you to just reflect your final words. What is it that as youth you would like to say to the youth? And those that are tuning in, to just really stay hopeful, to stay, to emphasize that that hopelessness comes from a fear of losing those you love, losing the environment you love, losing a culture you love, losing a history. But how do we turn that into action? How have each of you done it? And using your personal story and journey as a motivator for those that are kind of on the, that want to do something but are feeling hopeless. Let's go to, I want to throw this around. Storm, let's start with Storm.
Okay. I'll start by expressing gratitude for Arctic Basecamp and for the WWF UK team for, giving us this platform to be here. And then I think the message I want to end with is a message of abundance. In times, it's easy to fall into a scarcity mindset as though there is nothing more to pull from. But I think when you're operating from a stance of abundance and from a place of there's more to do, more to work towards, more like love, as was mentioned, to share and give out, like that's what keeps me going and keeps me motivated.
Go ahead, Mayum. Sophia, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm also very thankful, and I think on messages for older youth, I've heard once, and I try to adopt that. I heard that activism is a place for imagination, so that's why I see the world I want to live in, and then I act upon that. So me coming from academia and from the science field, I could develop as much research I wanted and publish many articles, but most of the people wouldn't read that. So that's why I challenged myself to be in these places. At first, I thought I didn't belong. But here am I again, and I'm happy to be sharing that with such an amazing people. So yeah, I would say imagine the world you want to live in and act upon that.
I love that. To Mayumi.
Yeah, I would say in terms of a message of hope, I think, when you earlier said it's okay to feel hopeless sometimes, and I totally agree with that. But then at the same notion, I think that I don't also want to have this defeatist attitude all the time. I think other young people, I would just say it's always really important to yourself that we are in a position to be here because of the work that older generations did to pave the way for us to be in this space and to challenge, the issues of our time. And so, if you look back at history, young people have always been at the forefront of social change, whether that's protesting South African apartheid, protesting Vietnam War. And so I think it's important to continue that legacy, and that requires hope. It's always an inevitable negotiation process, and we're going to feel uncomfortable and have plentiful amounts of barriers and powerful interests that are working against us. But we just have to continue the work that's been going for centuries, actually.
They say almost everything. I think you need to find love inside of you for anything, any reason. And yesterday we had our circle of hope right here. We were like on fire, as there were like thousands of years. People remained around fire to get their things done, right? And we were there building hope into ourselves. And I believe like if you can find your circle, sometimes hope can come from like seeing a flower just blooming, you know. Hope it can come when it's snow from the sky. And because you know that global warming is making this difficult, we have less snow than we expected in the West and should be this magic mountain. So I think look to nature, they will give you all the hope you need to continue. And if you had inside of you the desire to continue to live, is your duty to fight. You know, like is our duty to fight for our freedom. It's also our duty to live and be happy. So I invite anyone, especially youth, to put your hopelessness in a place fight and go to your buddies. And when things get really, really bad, ask for a hug. Be not just oxytocin in your brain, but it will build up from inside. I really think it can save lives. And this is my recipe for continue to go.
Would you give Donald Trump a hug?
You know what? If he is able to stay 20 seconds in my hug, I can do it. Because probably he is so uncomfortable with himself, he's not staying 20 seconds in a hug. But if he stays, I'll be able to talk to him if he stays 20 seconds in a hug.
I hope that with him on his inauguration day. That's amazing. So this just goes to show this is such a two-way mentorship, right? The youth having the mentor programs, being able to get exposure to these types of events, and then you're mentoring in return. Everything that was said on this panel is so inspiring, and we'll hopefully reach some of those negotiators down this magic mountain, and they will receive the mentoring from the next generation because they need it. Okay, well, thank you so much. This was really brilliant. And thank you for those of you tuning in. We don't have time, our group and Arctic Base are big fans of what you're all doing. We wish you the best of luck going forward. We will continue to give you a platform because, as we said right in the beginning, that communication challenge, we need to overcome it. We need to make information equitable around the world. So for the audience here in Davos, for those that are tuning in online, thank you for watching. Conversations like this, are essential for spreading awareness and just showcases how many voices there are in this climate movement. It is not homogenous by any means. We can see the diversity here, and there's so many more that are lending their voices, speaking up about really necessary climate action that needs to be taken. So this concludes our first day of broadcasting from Davos during the 2025 World Economic Forum. We'll be back tomorrow with a fantastic lineup of interviews and conversations that you will not want to miss. If you enjoyed this conversation, then why not join us and give us your own perspective? You can do that going to wedon'thavetime.org and signing up. So please engage with us, and we will see you tomorrow. Nicely done. What are you doing? Oh, God. You're welcome. Thank you for your insights, Julie.